Hello and welcome to Tech Raven. I'm Nigel and today I'm taking a look at the Arturia Synths DB-01 Bassline machine. This is basically a desktop synthesizer that creates bass lines. Now I know this product has been around for about 4 years now, but I've only just discovered it. I was speaking to somebody at a music shop in the UK a couple of weeks ago looking at buying some extra bits of outboard equipment because I use a combination of outboard and within the box. So to my right here I've got a Nord Lead A1 synthesizer. Above that I've got an Arturia Keylab Mat 2 MIDI keyboard controller, and down here in front of me I've got a full-size professional Roland electric piano or digital piano. I use Logic on the Mac with various software synths and other software plugins. So back to this. What I'm going to do in a minute, I'm going to jump on the computer and show you some compositions, some bits and pieces that I threw together. Well, not really compositions, they're more sort of 1, 2 or 4 bar loops because these sequencer type things, that's really about all you can do on them. And I have got a small list of pros and cons here which I'll be referring to towards the end of this video. But in the meantime, back to this. The build quality of it seems pretty good. I've seen a few YouTubers describe it as built like a tank. I wouldn't say that, you know, it's quite lightweight, but it is an all metal construction, but it is quite light. You have got these tactile buttons on it and the knobs all feel quite nice, and the build quality is generally pretty good. But again, I wouldn't say built like a tank. It is light, but it is pretty decent nonetheless. So the usual, it comes in quite a nice box. It's kind of like a shoebox-esque, but better build quality than a shoebox. So it comes in this really nice box, and it comes with a manual. The manual isn't great, in all honesty, because the first few pages are white text on black, and it's very hard to read. And then when you do get to white, it's in a font that's kind of all squashed up and very small and weird to read, actually. So I wouldn't bother with a manual. I'd go onto the Arturia Synths website and actually download the PDF and read it on an iPad or something. It'll be a lot easier than using this. It also comes with mains power adapter, and on top of that it comes with various different what do they call these things, depending on whereabouts in the world you are. You've obviously got the UK adapter there and various European adapters as well. So that's basically that. They are a Latvian company and these are actually made in Latvia, so I'm pleased to see that there's a company in Europe rather than one in China. And like I said, the build quality is pretty good, and you know, it's not like one of those Chinese companies that are just knockoff companies that copy everybody else's vintage synths from the 70s and 80s. And yes, I'm talking about Behringer, because some of the Behringer products can be a bit questionable with build quality and reliability. So it's good to see something coming out of Latvia for a change. And like I said, the build quality is fairly decent, and at least they're being innovative and trying to actually design and produce products that are unique and that are their own. So I did like that about it. So what I'm going to do now, before getting onto the pros and cons and what I like and don't like about it, I'm just going to go into Logic and show you a couple of bits that I put down so you can get an idea as to the sound, and then I'll come back here and wrap up the video with these pros and cons. Okay, so I'm here in Logic Pro, and as you can see I've got some tracks. I've got 1, 2, 3 of the Arturia Synths DB-01 Bassline tracks that I've recorded in from the DB-01 as sequences, with it DI'd directly into my Focusrite Claret 8 Pre audio interface. I've also got some drums here so you can hear it in context with Drum Machine. I'm just going to open this up for those interested. It's Addictive Drums and it's part of their real machines, and they've basically got various electronic drum kits, but I figured this would fit. So this is what the drums sound like on their own. So that's that, and then down here I've got a couple of Arturia DB-01 bass lines. So this is one, and this is a variation of that. Okay, so if I solo that one and that one so you can hear it with the drums, just to give you an idea as to the kind of thing that you can create with the DB-01. And then with the other variation, it would sound like this. Okay, and then down here I've got another variation, just the Arturia DB-01 Bassline on its own, something a bit deeper and a bit more sort of techno. And the drums, I've got to go with that. It's a slightly different drum kit I've got for this one. It's just a regular acoustic kit rather than an electronic one. So the drums alone sound like this. And again, the synth line on its own. And then both together, we would have this. Okay, and I've also got a couple of options down here. The drums alone are going to sound like this. Again, it's just an Addictive Drums electronic drum kit. I thought that would be fitting to go with this. And then I've actually got two bass lines that I recorded in from the DB-01. And the first one is this. And the second one is this. So if I play all three of those, this is what it's going to sound like. This is kind of, a typical sort of acid house techno type thing. So as you can hear, there was a little bit of knob twiddling on the higher bass line. So while this was being recorded in, DI'd into my audio interface, I was actually adjusting some of the controls in real time on the DB-01. So that's basically the kind of sounds that you can get from the DB-01. Again, for me, it's just that one sound. There isn't really much else you can get. You can get variations from it, but again, it's not exactly a Moog synth. It's just got its own unique sound. And for me, the bass sounds don't go incredibly deep. And just as a comparison here, I'm just going to play you a little bit of this because we have, if I just sort of drop this down to here so I know where I am, if I solo off this. So that's the Arturia synth, and then here I've basically got an Arturia. If I just bring this up, this is actually a software synth, Arturia Mini V3. As you can see, it's based on a Moog synth, and I'm just going to play you a little bit of this. And again, you can adjust all kinds of parameters in here. So you can do pretty much anything. So if I just leave this playing, and you start adjusting things around here, there's all kinds of things you can do with a software synth. So in my opinion, you've got a lot more scope here with something like a software synth over the Arturia DB-01. If I just play that in context with the drums. Again, going back to the Arturia. And then back to the Arturia. For me, with a software synth, you've probably got a few more options. And also another good thing about using the software synth, if I double click on it, you can see that you've basically got all the MIDI notes down here. And it's just a lot easier to compose with this view as opposed to using the step sequencer built into the DB-01, which is limited. It's only got the 16 steps for 16 buttons, and you can only maximize that to 4 bars. But here in Logic, you can basically, just drag this out and make it as long as you want, and it's just a lot easier and a lot more creative for me, I find personally, when you're using a software synth. Okay, so during this short clip, I'm just going to do a little bit of knob twiddling so you can get an idea of the kind of sounds that can be designed and sculpted using the DB-01. Of course, you can dig into the menus and make a few other little changes in there as well, but this short demonstration should give you a very good idea as to the kind of sounds that can be achieved. Okay, so to wrap up, I'm just going to go through a few of the negatives, things that I didn't like about it. The first one is there's no physical volume control on this. Now, given that the drive and the, where's it gone, the resonance over here, when you're adjusting those, they do push up the volume. So because there's no volume knob here, you can't actually bring the volume back down. Now, when you've got this DI directly into your audio interface, to keep the levels in your DAW on that particular channel correct, you need to be bringing the volume down to constantly compensate for what you're doing here. But you can't, because on this you've got to basically push the shift button here, you've got to push this up octave button as well, and then that sort of brings you into the menus, and then you've got to dial in to get to where the volume is, and then you've got to dial the volume down, and having to do that in the menu every time you make an adjustment up here to you know, the resonance or the drive is just a major pain. So I wasn't too keen on that. There's no headphone out. There is a what we've got here, a main out, but I wasn't going to risk plugging in my £500 Neumann headphones into it, because another thing about this, when it comes out of the factory, the default volume is set really high to the point that it will almost blow your speakers. So you've got to go in and turn that volume right down to about 40, 50 or 60. I can't remember the default, but it's way over 100, and it goes up to about 220 something, but it is really hot straight out of the box. So before plugging it in, I'd go into the menu before plugging it into any of your equipment and dial that volume right down to about 40 or 50 as a starting point. So because of that, I wasn't going to risk sticking headphones into the main out. I would have liked to have seen a dedicated headphone socket for that reason. The tempo is not memorized, so it is a step sequencer, and you can obviously save these steps. It's a 16-step sequencer, which is basically 1 bar in 4/4 time of 4 groups of semiquavers, but you can change that to 2 bars, 3 bars or 4 bars, in other words going from 16 steps to 32 and 64. And once you've actually designed a sequence, you can actually save it to any of these and recall it later. But the tempo isn't saved with it from what I could see, so you have to change the tempo every time. What else have I got here? It can drift out of tune. Now, this isn't unusual. Anybody that knows anything about analog synthesizers will know that analog synthesizers can drift, and you have to tune them, especially things like the Yamaha CS80, was it, from back in the late 70s? That thing would just drift out of tune all the time. But it's easy to do it on this. It's just a case of holding shift and the octave up button and going into calibrate and hitting that, and then after about 5 seconds it will have a countdown on here to show you that it's calibrated and it will be in tune again. You might want to do that every few months or so, or before an important session, just to make sure that it is all in tune with itself. There's no USB socket on the back of this, so when it comes to doing firmware updates, or even connecting it to the door to have audio over USB would have been nice, but there isn't. You've only basically got this output for the audio, and you've got MIDI, of course, but it would have been nice to have seen a USB or at least an SD card slot like what you've got on the back of the Empress pedal. Which one is it? The Empress Ecosystem. That's got an SD card slot for doing firmware updates. So when it comes to doing firmware updates on this, it's a major pain, because you haven't got those slots. You've actually got to use, if I remember correctly, one of the CV things, and you need a VLC player on your computer, and it is a bit of a faff. I've heard about people just running into all sorts of problems just trying to do a simple firmware update. So that, it just seems a real archaic way of having to do firmware updates. So I wasn't a fan of that either. What else have I got here? It's a little bit tricky to tie notes together and get the gate right. So when you're actually programming in a sequence, getting the gate, some of them extended for individual notes, or shortening off notes and getting them to tie together or not tie together, or changing them individually, that is a bit of a pain for me. I just find that I just couldn't quite nail it, no matter how much knob twiddling and messing around I did with it. So that's another negative. Also, I'm not a big fan of sequencers. I mean, this is nothing to do with Erica and this machine. It's just sequencers in general, be it this, or be it, an Arturia desktop synth, or any sort of sequencer thing that's 16, 32 or 64 steps, because I find you can't really compose. You just kind of get stuck in a loop. You have this sort of 2-bar loop, and it just goes round and round, and it's not really composing, in my opinion. And a lot of people will say, oh, they have lots of happy accidents. I hate that expression, happy accidents, because again, it's not really composing. I've seen some people on YouTube with this. They'll turn it on and they'll just go, turn all those on, and then they'll just start hitting individual ones and tuning individual notes, hitting of one tune, hitting of one tune, and then you end up with this do 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 do, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that sounds great, I'm going to use that. Well, that isn't really composing. It is a happy accident, but then the next thing you know, it's on some music streaming service somewhere, and that isn't their unique style, and it's not something they could ever reproduce. It's not composing, it's just, yeah, happy accidents. Now, there's nothing wrong with programming in a drum part. For example, in Logic, I use addictive drums, and I also use IK Multimedia Modo drums. And that's different because you can program in all the drum parts by dropping in the little MIDI things on the piano roll, and you can move them around and get them perfect, and you put in exactly what you want. Now, when you play that back, if you find you've suddenly got a tom hit on a simple fill that's come in a semiquaver too soon by mistake because you dropped it in the right place, and when you're playing it back, you listen to it and think, oh God, I didn't mean that. but you know what, that sounds really good, I'm going to leave that. That's fine, because that's just a small equation. But when you just have this sort of random thing and you're just sort of messing around and coming up with stuff, not a big fan of that. So yeah, it's what I call getting stuck in a loop, be it 1, 2, 3 or 4 bar loop, just going round and round, and you're just stuck in that. You can't go anywhere. Whereas if you got like a software synth, you've got the whole of Logic, you've got the whole score laid out. You can just sort of go on forever, and you're not stuck in this loop thing. So I find, if anything, it actually killed my creativity when I was hoping it was going to open up a whole new world of creative possibilities. But it actually did the opposite. It actually just squashed it right down to this being stuck in a loop thing. So wasn't a fan of that. But again, that's just me personally. If you're into samplers and sequencers, you're going to love this, because it'll be right, you know, in that sort of ballpark of as to your workflow, as it were. I also found that there wasn't much variation in sounds. I mean, this is certainly not a Moog by any stretch, or Moog as some people incorrectly pronounce it. It just didn't have those really deep, gut-wrenching, earthquaking, deep bass sounds that you can get from something like a Mini Moog. So yeah, it's certainly not a Moog by any stretch in terms of sound quality and build quality. I just found it hard to get any really deep bass pads from this. You know, there's only really one sound with a set of narrow variations on that sound. You haven't got a big wide spectrum of sounds on it, but it's not basically using sample sounds, it's synthesis, and because of the design of the unit, you're not going to be able to sort of go off too far from the basic sound that you're going to get from it anyway. But I just found the sound that it could get was limiting. You got the one sound and a few variations of it, and that's about it. What else have I got here? Yeah, I just found that I was doing multiple takes of the same sequence. So once I'd got a sequence programmed in, I just found that I was changing it to try and get a different sound, and then recording that into Logic, and then changing it to get another sound and recording that in. So I'd record like 8 or 9 or 10 different takes of the same sequence, but with different settings and different sounds. And even when I did that, and I was sort of playing them all back in Logic and trying to get them to go with a drum beat and another synth part, I wasn't really happy with any of them. So I couldn't really get it to sound how I personally wanted it to sound. And again, that's not a diss to this machine. It's just that I personally didn't really like what it was doing. I've also got here an Arturia drum, what's it called? And just grab this here off there. One of these Drum Brute Impact, and it's a similar story with that. It's a great machine, but again, I personally wasn't thrilled with the synthesis drum sounds that you can get from it. So again, it's nothing to do with the machine, it's just me and the kind of sounds that I want to achieve that I couldn't get from this. So that's another thing. For me personally, the sounds just didn't really do it. So I think, you know, it's basically stuck in that acid house stroke techno bass thing, if that makes sense. So, you know, for acid house, it's great. You're going to get some good stuff, especially messing about with the FM dial here. You can get some crazy and interesting sort of acid house type sounds. But, you know, acid house and techno is where this machine is stuck, in my opinion. There's a lot more options with software synths that sound just as good, because software synths these days have just got absolutely fantastic. The modeling on them is out of this world. You know, you can look on YouTube. I think companies like Anderton's in the UK, it's a music store, they did a comparison with the Oberheim synth and the Arturia Oberheim equivalent, I think it was, and they had 3 guys there, or was it 2? A couple of guys there that basically were blindfolded, and the guy in the shop was basically playing the actual Oberheim synth and then playing the software version of the same thing, and getting these 2 guys to try and guess which was which. And in a lot of instances, they were wrong. They guessed wrong as to which was the actual Oberheim. Sometimes they got it right, and sometimes they didn't really know. But when they got it right, it wasn't because, oh yeah, that's definitely it. It was because, oh, I feel that it was better because. So it was just some small little flavour somewhere. So it wasn't like one was better. There was just some slight differences here and there. So that's how good software synths are now. And you really can't tell the difference side by side. And when it's in the mix with the other instruments, you definitely can't tell the difference. Nobody could ever tell the difference. They are that good. So yeah, that's about it. That's the Arturia DB-01 Bassline desktop synthesizer. Would I recommend it? If you're into acid house and techno, yes. If you like outboard equipment and if you like these step sequencers, You will love it. It's competitively priced. Like I say, it's made in Latvia, so it's not some Chinese knockoff. It is unique, it is original, so you're going to get a unique and original sound out of it. So that's my evaluation of the Arturia Synths Bassline. Try one out by all means and see what you think. For me personally, it didn't really fit into the kind of stuff that I do, but for you, who knows, it could be a great piece of kit. So there we are. I'm Nigel, you've been watching Tech Raven, and hope to see you again in the next one. Bye for now.